We rolled all the way from Arizona to Maryland in this overheating tin of impending fiery doom, but some of the biggest hold your breath moments actually occurred when it wasn't rolling. Every time we turned that key, the lethargic starter motor screech sent shivers down my spine, wondering if this was the last time we'd have teeth on the flex plate. Somehow, everything held in there and was still working well enough for us to run a compression test. But boy, does that starter sound miserable. As much as I'd like to relieve it of its duties, however, that's a tall order because I'm pretty sure that motor isn't gonna fit through that gap without changing its state of matter. Which seems awfully impractical, so instead I think we may just be able to remove the steering rack and engine mounts, both of which I wanted to do anyway. The rack bushings have been reduced to some form of slime, and the welded solid motor mounts may have been cheaper than putting quarters into a motel room massage bed, but the outcome is, similarly, an uncomfortable experience for everyone. While those tremors can likely be given credit for the previous unscheduled disassembly of the steering shaft, this time around we're providing the rattling to spin those fasteners loose. Next in our sights are the two rack bolts, and while we started off with compliance, everything else was happy staying where it was.
Okay, well I gotta do the engine mounts first. Steering rack is actually touching the oil pan a little bit right here.
The floor jack will apply a little upward pressure as we entirely remove both the driver's side and passenger side mounts. Now that we have it floating, the engine can be raised and the stubborn steering rack bolts hammered out. Some more stubborn than others. But victory is eventually ours, and the rack can be left to hang. This is far enough to get the clearance we needed, but taking a closer look,
I actually don't see any hole. Ooh, well.
Which explains the small amount of play in the inner tie rod.
And just in general, it feels really crunchy.
Replacement racks seem to be plentiful and inexpensive, so that route seems like the best one.
That was not a tight bolt at all. I don't know why it's still surprising.
We'll save the rest of that situation for another day, as now that the starter has emerged, I'm invested in learning its secrets. I always kinda suspected loose bolts, because obviously, but that notion was immediately put to bed.
That was a lot of force.
And pretty soon I discovered why. There's a lot of gravity in that big bastard.
Oh, ow, 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 ow. My pinky. If I just... Got it. With that out of the way, we can actually take a good look at the flex plate. And as I had feared, the starter had definitely been chewing away at the teeth. The good news is it doesn't look that bad, just a little bit of scuffing on the corners.
And believe it or not, that torque converter bolt is tight.
But what about the starter? Well, unsurprisingly, based on the sounds it was making, it kind of looks like crap. I don't know if it was engaging bad, or maybe it wasn't coming out far enough. It's got a grindiness to it when turning. I'm really not too sure what was going on with this thing, but...
I sure am curious now. It sounds impressively terrible. That grinding wasn't just the tooth mesh, but also the motor itself. Additionally, there's a big bounce when the pole shoe slings the gear out, and a visible wobble throughout the rotating assembly. But since this is hardly an operation I've so closely scrutinized before, a point of comparison would be beneficial. This integrated solenoid gear reduction starter is what Ford switched to at the dawn of the 90s.
That's way more aggressive than the other one.
And yeah, it's not fair comparing a new starter to one built the same year Airplane was released, but it surely seems a lot more civilized. I did quickly find out that I bought the wrong model. What a silly mistake, they're clearly very different, and that one does actually fit. The solenoid sits uncomfortably close to the headers though, and I was too lazy to make a heat shield, so I guess we'll find out whether a cheap heat wrap will protect the starter or cook it from the inside out. Once that's mounted and tightened down, I'd love for it to take the engine for a spin, but somebody needs to actually wire the thing before that can happen. Those were the last big wires in the electrical system. Everything else is for the interior of the car, so I guess what I want to do now is put the battery in it. That was a lot of work doing all that wiring. I never really tested any of it. I hope it's good. No huge sparks. That's good. Not particularly related to anything. I'm just gonna put that right there. Oh shit, I really see smoke. There's smoke coming out of the alternator. Now why's that? I'm gonna pull this connector out. Couldn't have done these backwards, right? So, yeah, these wires are backwards. Shit. I guess I should pay more attention to the wire orientation on the cheapest connectors money can buy. Hopefully, the voltage regulator can forgive my transgressions. Okay, it's flipped around. This time around, there's no sign of trouble, and even with the key turned to run, everything seems to be working as intended. I hear the relay clicking. That's two of the relays that work at least. So, how about that starter? Ah, now that's smooth. It finally stopped sounding like the tilt-a-whirl at the carnival your parents warned you about. And if that works, what else does? Running lights? Radiant. Headlights? Dazzling. Turn signal? Not magically fixed. It lights up, there's just no flashy. That whole time, this was my turn signal. Sean said it didn't work very well, but what does he know? It also doesn't cancel, so it never turns off on its own, which is very annoying. Left turn, that one doesn't come on at all. When I turn that just slightly, you can see the turn signal light on the dash. Oh, it's flashing, what the hell? Well, this light's on now, but it's not flashing. Maybe there's a problem with the flashing unit and the switch itself. I don't hear it, so maybe it's not transmitting enough current for the lights, I don't know. There's some weird stuff going on in there. On top of all of that, the ignition switch is in its own brand of strange. When you start turning it, the tack light comes on. But the relay hasn't clicked, so ignition isn't on. There's the relay. There should only be one step here, it shouldn't be doing that. The turn of the key is generally mushy with no felt clicks. It doesn't fully spring back out of start on its own, and turning it counterclockwise should be the accessory position, but it really does not like going into accessory. It took me probably 3 minutes of fiddling to get it to go there. It could have something to do with the fact that it looks like the ignition was pried out with a screwdriver at some point. Basically, that whole area is chock full of problems and about to undergo significant changes. We'll disconnect the battery and reattach the trim panels taken off to attach it. Should I have washed some of these panels? Nah, they're fine. But a party crasher arrived just in time to stop me in my tracks. Excuse me, sir? Cicada climbed in there. This, boys and girls, is why you need a shifter boot. Is that where you need to be? I don't think it is. Sir, please. God damn it. Don't go under the seat. You little shit. Oh, you're back now, huh? Stay out of the garage. Okay, task at hand. I have assembled quite an assortment of gauges, so we're gonna need to make some room. We'll be removing that fancy tack, the stock gauge cluster, and the mechanical set that had served us so well. I was feeling guilty about ditching that rad cluster until it started absolutely crumbling when I took it out. This plastic is just coming apart. I didn't have to unhook the electrical connector because it snapped out the plastic tabs that were supposed to be holding it in. Yeah, I think I'm good to replace this. While doing more tidying and wire inventory, I came across the wires for the reverse lights. And I'd love it if these worked now that we've installed bulbs. The shifter already has a neutral safety switch mounted, not that it's ever been hooked to anything. But since it's caught my wandering eye, we can add on a reverse switch and wire both to their respective circuits. With those connected and a shift indicator light added, we should probably do a quick test. Okay, well the door buzzer works. How about the reverse lights? Yeah! And make sure they turn back off. Perfect. Hush, hush, child. With that side quest started and finished, let's get back to the main side quest. First up is figuring out how to mount a tack and speedo in place of the crispy cluster. Lucky for us, the surrounding trim has 4 mounting points that seem more than capable of holding a 16 gauge panel. After some guesstimating, we'll cut out an aluminum rectangle and trim it down until it fits just about perfectly on the inside of that surround. 2 screws can directly secure the lower tabs of the panel, but the other 2 are going to need some booster seats. The whole assembly feels impressively secure and should leave just enough room for everything we'll need. Of course, I don't have a matching hole saw, so out comes the don't try this at home cutter. What seems to work well is dragging it around at a low speed, not letting it see that you're afraid, then flipping the piece at half depth to finish the cut. We'll file it to fit, and do the same thing all over again. The tack doesn't include any panel mounting hardware, it's really just meant to clamp to a steering column, but another bent and drilled piece of aluminum should be able to do the job. We'll also be adding indicator lights, so a few more holes are in order, but before long we have that shined up and ready to assemble for real. As the centerpiece of the dashboard, symbolically not laterally, I was nervous about making this look decent, and it's not fancy, but I think it fits the rough and tumble backyard race car aesthetic pretty well. However, it's not back padding time just yet because some idiot decided he wanted a full array of needles to stress over. It seems obvious enough to stack 3 gauges side by side in the home of the former air controls, so we'll cut out another aluminum rectangle, spin a couple holes in it, add the sprinkles, and smile at it just long enough to get motivated to figure out a second row. I kinda ran out of ideas and energy for this one, we'll just reuse the triple bracket that was previously on the car. It works well enough, although it doesn't quite match the set above it, and it did need an additional anti-wobble brace. Below it is going to be one more addition, a switch panel. I had this piece of aluminum square tube sitting around, and it kinda almost made sense to use it for this, so yeah, sure, why not. We'll add mounting holes to get to those holes, an add-on panel for electrical outlets, there is one in the ashtray but it's non-functional and gross, mounting holes for switches, and slots on the opposite side to actually fit them. Okay, maybe the square tube was not the easiest path here, but it's cool in a kinda funky way. I think we should call it done and take all these dashboard additions back off the car in order to wire them up. Like the rest of the car, I rolled through this without a detailed plan or enough wire colors, but we'll do the best we can to make everything reasonably sensible and safe. Turns out these indicator lights are pretty cheesy and the wires easily separate, but hot glue, heat shrink, and ample zip tie strain relief should be able to hold them together. Before everything can be installed, we'll need to finalize the power pasta on the car side and uncover a few more enigmas.
There's this thing under the floor mat. I'm not really sure what it is, but it doesn't seem to do anything, so I'm just getting rid of it.
We can also unearth the turn signal flasher and replace it to see if it actually was the problem all along.
That little nub that twists and locks in isn't there on the new one, so I'm just gonna have to zip tie it back there. Right turn? Hey! Left turn. Yep, that's all I needed that whole time. Well, that might need some work. It flashes with the hazards. If I click the turn signal switch down, I can hear the flasher going, so they're blinking, nothing happens. Lift it up just a little bit, then it starts to flash. Seems to be an issue with the turn signal switch itself. It's strange that it's only the front one. Not entirely sure how it's doing that.
It's probably worn contacts and high resistance causing this weird behavior, but I'd say it's equally likely to be an ancient curse. After a few tries, I did coax the old flasher into clicky clacking, but it was only after being removed from the car's spiritual bubble. So we'll cautiously proceed with finishing up the interior wiring, and hope that all of this cutting and splicing will cleanse the vehicle of some of its gremlins. I made an impressive mess in the process, but the wiring, including a GPS antenna for the Speedo and a USB adapter for the dash cam, should be ready to connect up to all of this junk. We'll leave the main cluster loose so that we can still reach the button on the back of the Speedo, but it is time for a test.
Oh boy, this is actually scary.
This first toggle is for the ignition, and yeah, we appear to be in business. The fuel gauge was never going to read correctly. The tank is pretty much dry, which the gauge is certainly optimistic about, but it's at least a placeholder.
Good news, the key minder still works. Oh, and the dimmer works. I think the carpet is sizzling.
How about the indicators?
Oh, there it is. That's how that was before, so that's okay.
Everything seems to be lighting up right when it should, with just one exception. The parking brake is set, but the bulb remains dark. Jumping the pressure switch wakes it up, so the problem isn't with my additions. But how about what's going on in here?
I think this might just be so dirty it's not making good contact. I'm just gonna spray this down with some contact cleaner.
Give it a little scrub, and work the switch back and forth.
Well, what do you know?
Not an exciting fix, but just what it needed. The dash cam and add-on ports work too.
This is what we bought on the road. Hey, yeah, that sure would have been nice on the trip, huh?
So it looks like it's time to set the odometer. Hit the button 5 times, tap and hold to subtract, tap again and hold to add miles, which may take a while. The factory cluster shows a skewed 58,000 that I think is safe to call 158. Add to that an estimated 5K from the previous owner and 3K from us, and we're looking for 167.
I'll just be sitting here for 1,000 years. That's a really firm button you got there, guys. Did it have to be that firm? 1/10 of the way there. I think I figured it out. Sitting here holding this very hard to press button is my personal hell. Is it gonna roll over or is it gonna actually hold that extra digit? Okay, it's just not showing it. Back to holding the button. Okay, well that was excruciating. Oh boy, you sure better remember that with the ignition off. Okay, thank God.
That about sorts out the gauges, but our work is never done. A pretty basic part with a pretty basic function is still missing. A horn. I picked up a boring old generic set that should be plenty, and once we bend the terminals flat, those tuck in pretty nicely behind the headlights. Testing them is a little tricky as we don't currently have a horn button, but a jumper should do the trick.
That's pretty loud.
While we're doing nice to haves, the car came with this uninstalled shift boot that I'd love to be using. Plus, I did lose track of the gears a couple of times in stop and go traffic, so having an indicator would be handy. Once the handle is unscrewed, we'll get the indicator cable mounted, attached, and adjusted before lubing the hell out of the shifter, dropping on the surround, securing that with appropriate hardware, fitting the boot, and finally reattaching the handle with an unholy splash of thread locker cause I was real tired of it coming loose. That small change is a huge step up visually, and hopefully helps to keep out at least the large flying insects.
Reverse, neutral, 1, 2, 3.
The interior redecoration project has come a long way, but somehow I still wasn't satisfied with the dashboard. Which, it occurs to me, I've never actually seen the top of thanks to this fabric cover. It's somehow worse under there than I had imagined, although not without treasures.
Expires 2007. I was trying to peel this off and it just kind of wants to peel off the dash. That's not a great look.
Which helps to ease my guilt about this next change. Air-fuel ratio and vacuum gauges would give a lot of feedback about the carburetor tune, which would be a huge help in getting the car running better and maybe even cooler. Widening this panel to fit 5 across would have been a sleeker route, but after seeing the state of the dash pad, cutting out some of the decrepit foam barely even felt like a crime. We'll substantially reprofile the generic plastic gauge pods so that it can sit snug to the dashboard at just the right angle, add on some custom mounting tabs, and we've got an ugly but sturdy new home for our ever-growing collection of readouts. We'll have to finish that later due to an unexpected delay.
Was it not reading at 0 before?
So now seems like the perfect time to return to another job I skipped out on. The steering rack has been hanging from its tie rods for nearly 2 weeks, and seems about due for a full dose of the freedom it has been tasting. The driver's side rod end was patched when we replaced that side's lower ball joint in Texas, and I can't help but notice that the 2-month-old boot has already torn. We'll finish releasing the steering rack, but I don't want the new ball joint failing thanks to some shoddy dust seal, so we'll take a minute to deal with that. For the record, I am avoiding removing the wheels because I'm afraid of the sketchy lug nuts, but we do have plenty of room to get to the boot.
Real quality part there.
After some digging around in my collection, I sourced a polyurethane boot that'll let us stitch the bendy steel retaining plate, and the fit on the stud is less than ideal, but at this point even duct tape would be an upgrade. We'll flush out the old grease, drop the red top hat on, and reassemble everything else just as it was. Getting back on track, we have a fresh-faced cardboard box in the garage.
This is the new steering rack for our Mustang 2. It's so excited FedEx couldn't even contain it.
Replacement Pinto racks are out there, but I went for this model in order to change the steering ratio. Instead of a little over 4 turns lock to lock, we're looking at 3.5. Trading increased effort for a quicker response seems worth it, but there is a difference that will be harder to overcome. The Pinto input shaft uses a flat to locate the coupler flange, but apparently the Mustang 2 has no such feature. The spline count and sizing seems to be the same, but of course the coupler isn't gonna drop onto there. And on top of that, the bolt retaining notch is notably larger on the old rack than the full circumference one on the shiny new guy. But I'm pretty sure that once we center and mark our youthful friend, an appointment with the angle grinder can solve both of those problems. I don't enjoy modifying brand new parts, much less ones that keep the wheels pointed straight, but we'll take our time and keep this steel cool. The bolt is close to fitting, but we'll need some additional room, so we'll guess and check our way to victory. Once we can finally install the coupler for real, and fortunately it does appear reasonably centered, we'll coat the shaft with anti-seize.
Get the top there, what the hell not? Yeah, let's just, yeah.
And torque the thread-locked bolt.
There's no plate in it at all.
So I'm confident we have corrected the incompatibility, but I do want to make one more change. The rack came with pre-installed rubber bushings, but I already have polyurethane ones I'd rather use. We'll employ the ball joint press in conjunction with a socket to extract the steel sleeve, and then the rubber pops right out. After repeating that process one more time, the significantly stiffer poly bushings drop right in, and with a spray of silicone, the steel sleeve we just removed can be reinstalled.
Clampy, clampy, clamp.
With the rack finally assembled, the last thing we'll do is adjust the tie rod lengths to match the old setup as closely as possible. This will give us a good starting point that's likely close enough to drive the car before aligning it. After a cleanup pass on the mounting bolts and their crusty rusty homes in the crossmember, we're ready to pop those in and bring the shiny steering rack up to meet them. To match the red bushings, and because I don't trust these, we'll add poly tie rod boots and get those tightened down too. They're looking a little cramped with the suspension hanging down, but seem to hold on to grease, so we'll let that slide. The alignment passes a cursory eyeball check, and the wheels turn impressively smoothly, so we'll move on up to reattaching those to the steering wheel. For now, we'll keep the rag joint connection, although we do have a replacement part that is significantly less cracked. I was a bit confounded by exactly how this is supposed to be attached to the steering shaft, and settled on washers over the pins to keep them from pulling through. We'll get the second set of bolts and lock nuts torqued on the rack coupler,
and now we can steer again. Well, that was way more confusing than it should have been.
But at least the turning bits are once again connected. Just in time to take things apart again and tackle these steering column's deficiencies.
First thing we're gonna do is take off the steering wheel, and I'm just gonna chuck it in the backyard somewhere, because I actually really hate it.
The large diameter makes it difficult just to sit in the thing.
Fully up against the steering wheel. I don't think I could operate the clutch if it was in here.
Every part you come into contact with is uncomfortably thin, cracked, and sharp, hence the white and yellow tape. The hub is too broken to hold in the horn button, and, bafflingly, the wheel is horizontally symmetrical, leading to a few embarrassing moments where I lost track of center when leaving a parking lot. The only fix is going to be a complete replacement, but I'm also too cheap to buy a fancy wheel and picked up an old Grant off of a 1970 Mustang. It's about an inch smaller, which, like the rack, won't do favors for steering effort, but it's simple, comfortable, and modular, so I'm pretty sure it'll be a worthwhile replacement. As a final act of rebellion, the steering wheel refuses to fit my universal puller or come loose via traditional means.
That's pretty on there. Gonna knock this thing off the jacks.
Turns out this adjustable spring shackle has the right spacing, and after a little back and forth tightening, we have liftoff. Now that we're inside the column and can already see broken off pieces of turn signal cam floating around in there, I'm feeling hopeful that we'll be able to improve some of the unreliable controls.
We'll turn the key to accessory, which is this way. It doesn't love going into there, but oh, it doesn't want to do it at all now. We'll put the key into run.
And then we can lightly press in this pin to free the cylinder. Eventually. After taking a minute to resculpt the mangled lock housing, we'll remove the push nut retaining the turn signal cam, breaking it in the process, and unscrew and pull forward the turn signal switch and key minder connector. To give us more wiggle room, we'll undo the column's plastic cover and carefully pull the wires just enough to get the switch out of the way, giving us access to the bolts underneath. They're loose, of course, letting the housing rock back and forth a bit, but adding a little thread locker and retorquing the factory lock nuts clamps it in place nice and solid. I'll do a little cleanup since we're in there.
It's dusty.
And re-grease the moving parts. Then the switch goes back in, and since all the contacts look deeply unhappy, they'll receive a complimentary spa treatment. Hopefully that clears up some or all of the switch's weirdness, and a touch of dielectric grease is the cherry on top. I ended up with 2 replacements for the broken turn signal cam, same part number but look to be made at least a decade apart, and we'll transfer over the detent and contact bars to the newer one with the steel backing plate. They don't lock into the new cam as well as they did the old one, so we'll have to install it very carefully, and then lock it in with the included push nut, which
Seriously?
immediately broke.
I knew there was a reason I bought 2 of these.
Fortunately, that one did the trick, and the new cam feels nice and clicky. We also have a fresh lock cylinder, both so that we're starting from a clean slate and to give me a spare key that will forcefully click into the housing. It still felt pretty rough, but after removing the wheel lock pin plate to do some additional greasing, turning it feels way better than before. It even springs back out of the start position now.
Didn't do that.
With the important bits of reassembly finished, it's time to connect the battery and do a proper test. The key buzzer certainly still works. You can at least use the sticky door switch to shut it up. Sometimes.
Okay, let's see. Hey. I think we're in business. I even figured out how to mute the key minder.
The run position still feels a bit vague, justifying my toggle switch hack in at least some small way, but at least the cylinder turns to accessory.
Although, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if anything is wired to accessory.
After one last test of the horn, we'll disconnect the battery and try to sort out the steering wheel. Aside from the difference in outer diameter, the Pinto wheel is also 2 inches longer from the front face to the hub. To maintain that distance, we have a 2-inch spacer that'll sit between the Grant wheel and its adapter. I'm feeling confident that the new setup is going to work, so I decided to untape the old wheel to reveal its full hand-slicing greatness, and confirm that it is indeed symmetrical.
That's definitely why I had so much trouble telling which way was up sometimes. That's a bad design. I really hate this wheel.
The Grant setup is not without its faults, however. A common issue with these adapters is that the solder blob attaching the inner horn wire interferes with the brush, but at least this one has already clearanced itself at the previous owner's expense. The bigger concern here is the totally melted wiring. They still work, so we're just going to strip back the bad insulation and cover them up with 2 layers of heat shrink. We'll bolt the adapter onto the spacer, splicing in wire extensions because they were too short for the spacer, and drop the assembly onto the column. With it torqued to 30 foot-pounds, we'll attach the wheel mounting plate and test fit the wheel itself. Ooh, that's way better. The turn signal cancel works. Awesome. That makes me really happy. Once I stacked on the horn button plates, however, the excitement quickly faded. The bolt shoulders are supposed to sit on the lower disc, but they pulled right through, which I'm guessing happened to the previous owner, locking the button closed and blaring the horn long enough to melt the wiring. I'd love to avoid Grant's repeat performance, so I went out and bought an entire adapter kit just to get new horn button parts. I still don't care for the design, but the new one should actually work the way they want it to. If I can avoid breaking something for once. This time, the bolts clamp down on the disc properly, although I'd like to change some things if I ever take it apart again. The mechanism seems ready to work, but it turns out that neither of the springs will. They're supposed to sit on the steering shaft, but thanks to the spacer and Grant's lack of foresight, they are nowhere near long enough. Taping a pair of 5 7/16 lock nuts to the spring turned out just about perfect though, and provides adequate tension for the button, which finally works. All the faults we fixed along the way are great and all, but a steering wheel's aesthetic really alters the car's vibe and the change feels like a hugely significant improvement. But the dashboard behind it still needs finishing, and we now have a gauge that hasn't been dropped to put in there. It will need a spacer, both to match the tall AFR gauge and to clear the dashboard, and this cutoff of exhaust tubing should do the trick. Now that the gauges are mounted, it's time to figure out the rest, especially the wideband O2 sensor. After looking over our options, I decided that the ideal install location would be in the lead-in to the muffler on the passenger side. We'll use a step bit to make room for a weld-in bung, and I didn't have to look hard to find pinholes around the flange, so we'll go over everything just to make sure that the sensor can get the best possible readings. We won't be reinstalling the muffler just yet, but at least we have it ready to go. What we will need to sort out right now is the gauge wiring, and since the car side has already been finished, these two will piggyback in between existing connectors. The vacuum hose and O2 sensor wire will join the busy bundle passing through the firewall, and after a bit of dashboard dress-up, the finished gauge pod is ready to go in. After running the dash mat through the washing machine to minimize its funk, I notched it to fit the added bump, and that'll do unless I someday decide to class this thing up. One final test seems to indicate that all of the electronics are working, so it's time to stick on the dash cam. No, I don't know why the rear view mirror is mounted so low down, but I don't really want to mess with it at the moment. A much more critical failing is the lack of cup holders, which caused several spilled drinks as I directed that achingly slow steering rack through parking lots. There isn't an obvious location to put one, and my go-to bottles have trouble fitting in some of the universal options, so it's time to get creative with these slip-fit ends of 3-inch exhaust pieces, sliced to add some extra wiggle room, and welded together on top of 1/8-inch steel strap. Boy, I sure am glad I was able to build this cup holder without it looking like anything else. And once it's fully welded, shaped, and drilled, we can go ahead and attach it to the transmission tunnel. It's a touch awkward, but leaves plenty of room to operate the shifter and handbrake. I sure am glad that we have all this time to work on frivolous amenities, since the basic mechanical foundation of the car is so sound and reliable. Oh, wait, it's still awful and in pieces. Somebody should probably look into that.
And look at me being good. I didn't even get the 160 mile an hour version.
I know I'm showing you exactly how to hotwire it, but please be cool.
Get out of the garage, you're just gonna die in there, you idiot.
Well, why are you doing this? That doesn't seem to be fixing it.